Welcome to Connections, a podcast from the Graymere Church of Christ in Columbia, Tennessee. Our goal is to have discussions and messages that encourage us and strengthen our faith. We appreciate you joining us. Let's keep learning and growing together. Thank you for joining us in Connections. We appreciate you spending time with these conversations that are designed to be encouraging and designed to spark some thought and some interest. And as we've been going through these Connections episodes, we've been trying to focus on what we're focusing on in our Sunday morning Bible classes at Graymere. And starting in this next quarter, we're going to be focusing on worship, increasing our passion in worship. And so we're going to be spending some time today thinking about some of the songs that we sing and some of the stories behind those songs. And so I'm really thankful that Aaron Hilliard took the time to be with us today. Aaron is not only a musician and music teacher, but also is someone with a passion for leading worship and for preaching and in ministry. And so both of those come together for us to really kind of dig into some of these behind the scenes stories of how some of the most well-known songs that we have come to us. And so I'm going to just kind of start off, Aaron, by letting you tell us how long have you been interested in some of these hymn stories and kind of what led to that?
Sure. Well, I've always loved music since I was a little kid, and I remember, singing in church. I remember we would have family get-togethers actually sometimes with my mom's family where we would end up singing hymns, and we actually still do that sometimes at Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
We'll spend some time just as a family, have a little hymn sing that we'll do. But I think it was probably high school, maybe college, when I got kind of interested in learning some of the background behind some of the hymns that we sing. And we had a good family friend, Graham McKay, who has been a preacher and missionary, and my mom worked with him at the Tennessee Children's Home at the time. I worked there some too during the summer, so I knew him. But he would sometimes talk about some of the stories behind them, and I think that's maybe kind of what got me a little bit interested in it. And I know at one point I kind of decided I'd like to kind of start a collection of hymn books and talk to him about it. It's like, hey, come over. I've got tons. I've got shelves of them in my house. So I'll give you a bunch. So talk with him some. I remember finding a nice devotional book too called "Then Sings My Soul." That's kind of a daily devotional that has a lot of hymn stories in it and has some of the hymns. And it was cool too because it had lots of them that I knew, but a lot of them that I didn't know as well. Kind of introduced me to some of those. But I think that's kind of when I really got started being interested in learning more about them and got more books like that. Some of them more devotion. A lot of them were kind of more devotional style where they would give you kind of a little snippet about it. But I've read some more in-depth books as well about some of the hymn writers and those kinds of things. So it's been something I've been interested in for a pretty good while now.
And Graham McKay, who you mentioned, he's also written a book about the song backgrounds.
Yes, he's written a couple of them. Yes.
Okay,
actually.
great.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that is, I guess, interesting to me is every summer we try to figure out if we're planning a sermon series. It's hard to do a series in the summer because everybody's kind of going in and out. And so the last few years, we've at least taken 4 or 5 weeks to do a series that focuses on either a hymn that we've sung a long time or a new song. And you mentioned the book, Then Sings My Soul, which is that line from How Great Thou Art. And that's kind of what we've called that series every year. And so that's been a really interesting exploration just to see some of the songs maybe don't have stories that stand out or maybe are really remarkable. I've found that a lot of the newer songs have stories that just kind of begin with a couple of people decided we want to write a song, because if something's commissioned, all that. But there are still some powerful ones for new songs, and then a lot of those older hymns. And I know that you're a big fan of these older hymn writers like Isaac Watts and some of those guys. So what are what are some of your favorite hymn stories to tell? Maybe about familiar ones you
Sure.
know about.
I think one of the most powerful stories, and a lot of times too, like knowing more of the context of why a person wrote a specific hymn, or just sometimes just kind of their life background, can really make the hymn itself more meaningful. I think one of the most powerful stories is for "It Is Well with My Soul" by Horatio Spafford wrote the words to that,
Hmm.
and then Philip Bliss is the one who wrote the music for it. Um, but he was a successful businessman. He and his family were gonna be traveling to England by boat. He had some things that he had to finish up, so he sent his wife and his daughters, on ahead, and, but there something happened. There was an accident, and, the ship sank, and his wife was saved, but all I believe it was 4 of their daughters, died in that accident. And so she was rescued. They took her on to England, and so he was then taking, the next boat as soon as he could to go and join her. It was actually, as he was journeying over, somebody told him when they were around the spot where the accident had happened, and that's when he went in and sat down and wrote, those words, and just knowing that, he really knew what he was talking about
Yeah.
with the idea of sorrows like sea billows,
Yeah.
rolling over him, but then to be able to say even through all of that, um, "It is well with my soul." I think it's a beautiful hymn. The tune's amazing. I think really helps complement the beauty of the words, but just knowing that story behind it, I think that's a really good example of, again, just knowing that wasn't just a flippant thing for him to say, that he really had gone through this terrible tragedy and still
Yeah.
could say, through all of that, "It is well with my soul." And then, writing the last verse about when the face shall be sight and all of that, and that hope that helped to carry him through that tragedy.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned something there that is so significant, the idea of the words of the song being complemented by the tune. And there are times when I think there are hymns that we sing that you can really tell there's just that close, it just seems to fit.
Mhm.
There are others that maybe the fit isn't quite as easy to see, but it seems to me the ones that endure are the ones that do have that melding of words and the tune that reinforce each other.
Yeah, yeah, that I can definitely think of some specific ones that I have thought in seeing them every now and then. It's like, "Well, this tune does not fit
Yeah,
the mood of the song."
right.
But yeah, so that it is, and it's one of the things that's kind of interesting that we now so think of, like, well, this is the tune for this song. And like if you go back to the 1700s, that actually wasn't as much the thing. That like they would write hymns that had a certain rhythm to them. It has a certain number of syllables to each line, and then the tunes were almost interchangeable.
Mm,
Like they could write a hymn and you could sing it to a tune that everybody already knew.
yeah.
And so, and that kind of fits in with another one of my other favorite hymn writers, Isaac Watts, and his story, because he went through a period of time where he was writing a new hymn every week for a period of 2 years. And so you say that, and people think, well, would be really hard to do that. And part of it was that he was writing the words, and they
Mhm.
were singing them to tunes that they already knew. But he's really interesting story as well, because he was super brilliant. Like already by age 13 or 14, he had studied Latin, Greek, and Hebrew,
Oh,
and he was really brilliant. His family, he was from England, from Southampton, and his family, they were dissenters or separatists. They weren't part of the Church of England. They didn't believe in all of the teachings and the practices that were part of the official state Church of England. In fact, his father was in prison when he was born because of his dissenting beliefs. At different times in English history, there were greater or lesser degrees of toleration of those. But he got started writing hymns because at the time all they sang was psalms.
mm,
They would sing, and they were versions of the psalms translated into English with a rhyme and a rhythm to them, so that you could sing them to some of those tunes that people would have already known. But a lot of times the poetry of those psalm settings was not always all that great. They didn't always necessarily sing them all that well either. It's kind of funny, hard for us to imagine, but a lot of times the way they would do them is the person who was leading singing would sing the first line, and then the congregation would sing that back, and then he would sing the next line because they didn't all have a book in front of them to be able to see the words. So that contributed somewhat to it as well. But he was sort of complaining about that. It's like saying, I feel like we could do this better. Our singing could be better. And his father kind of said, well, if you think you can do something better, go ahead. And so he did. He wrote his first hymn, and they sang it at the congregation where his family was part of that next Sunday, and it was really well received. And so again, like for the next 2 years, he was writing a new hymn every week for them to sing then in church that next Sunday. So it's a pretty cool story. He went on to be a minister himself, preached for many years at a church in London. As interesting as a mark of how well he was appreciated by the congregation where he preached. He had kind of like a breakdown in his health and really felt like he couldn't perform his duties as a minister like he wanted to, or like he should be able to. And he tried to resign, and they wouldn't let him resign. They hired an assistant to help him. There was an older couple in the congregation there that offered for him to come and stay to kind of rest and recuperate on their estate. And that's actually where he ended up living for the rest of his life, was with them to kind of take that burden off of him as well. He went on to write a lot of hymns, like several hundred hymns, and a lot of them are ones that we still sing today. He did going back to the Psalms. He did actually write a collection of hymns based on Psalms, but what he was trying to do was to take the language and the imagery of those Psalms, but sort of make more explicit their connections with Jesus and with New Testament teaching. In fact, he called the book the Psalms of David imitated in the language of the New Testament. Joy to the World is one of the most famous. It's probably his best known hymn, like worldwide, because it's such a popular song that we associate with Christmas. But that's one of those that's actually based on one of the Psalms that he included in that book.
Well, and I'd always heard, and maybe you'd be the person to ask if this is true or not, but I'd heard that Isaac Watts, because it was so different or new to be singing something other than the Psalms, that that line in "Come We That Love the Lord," that let those refuse to sing who never knew our God, but children of our heavenly King. I've heard that was kind of a statement about people who might have been resistant to that. I don't know. I haven't ever been able to find any documentation of it. It makes for a great story, but I haven't ever been able to find that.
I don't know. I haven't heard that specific story, but I have definitely seen that there was a lot of resistance to that at the time, that people didn't think that was appropriate to do, that if we're singing in church, we should only sing texts that come directly from the Bible. So that it was kind of controversial. And I feel like maybe that I've read that controversy might have been a part of what kind of contributed somewhat to that breakdown that he had at his health.
Yeah. Well, and just in thinking about the different way that was done, today, if we're describing a new song to somebody, we'll usually say, yeah, it goes like this, and kind of sing the tune.
Mm-hmm.
But if you had just those few sets of tunes and he's writing a different one every week, then the emphasis would be on, no, it's the song that says this.
Yeah.
And so that is a very different emphasis, that it's on the content rather than the tune. And again, you need both for a song, but that's just kind of a different emphasis than we have today.
It is, yeah. I mean, if you think about it too, especially with those older ones, that's the title of the song is usually the opening line of that first verse is usually what we think of as kind of being the title of the song.
Yeah. And I'm trying to think, even in our songbooks today, and I probably should have tried to make a list before I came in, but there are some that will still have maybe the same tune, but different words. I'm trying to think of "O Thou Fount of Every Blessing." I think there's a or "For a Thousand Tongues to Sing" is
Yes.
one
Yeah,
that'll
that's
have the same tune as oh, I'm drawing a blank on it now, but you will have
yeah. Yes, that is one, "Oh, for a faith that will not shrink," I think
yes,
it's one
yeah,
yeah, so there are there are still some, hymns that are still from that tradition, or where in our psalm books, we'll have the same hymn on back-to-back pages with 2 different tunes
yes,
that
yeah,
we both sometimes use. That's something that's interesting to me too, is sometimes how, how a particular set of words gets associated with a particular tune to, again, now we tend to more often be, "Hey, this is the tune that goes with this song,"
yeah,
and maybe that hasn't always been the tune that goes with that song. So it's particularly interesting to me how you can have pick up 2 different hymn books and it be a totally different tune for this same hymn. I think that's particularly true, like if you went from America to England, we might sing a lot of the same words, but
mhm.
they sing it to a totally different tune from what we're used to singing it to in America.
Yeah, and just the challenge of that, if you've ever led singing, and it's maybe not as bad because we've got the screens now,
Mhm.
but when you would have, I know in the old books used to have, "I Know That My Redeemer Lives." There were the two different versions, and they're at the same opening.
Yeah.
So if you said the wrong number and then started the wrong one, you could get really confused by that, and maybe there's something to be said for the fact that I've been in situations, and maybe you have too, where someone's led a song and started it with a totally different tune.
Mhm.
And a lot of times everybody just pitches in and
Yeah.
we'll just sing it. Let's sing what we've got.
Yeah.
There's something about, hey, it's the words that we're singing
Yeah.
that seem to matter the most. When you think about some of your favorite songs to lead, are there any ones when you lead that you think about either the story behind it, or maybe it's special because of the life of the author, or some of those? Obviously, we've talked about Isaac Watts and touched on those, but I know are there any others that
Well,
come to mind?
probably my favorite hymn is "Be Thou My Vision," and that's
Yeah.
one that, is not as well known, I feel like, at least it's not one that I grew up singing, it's one that I learned. I don't even remember specifically when I first heard it or learned it, I think probably in college or later, but that's one that I know is not, that familiar, and it's one that we don't know the specific story behind it, but the thing to me that I do think about a lot with it is how old it is. That,
Yeah.
like, was originally written in Irish and, goes back over 1,000 years, like, it's maybe more like 1,200 or more years old, and other than songs that we sing that are direct quotations from scripture, it's pretty much the oldest hymn that we still sing today. So there's something just to me that's really cool to think about singing a song, singing words that have been sung by other Christians for
Yeah.
1,000 years. A mighty fortress is our God is another one. It's about 500 years old, but just thinking that for so long, and some of those too that that were originally written in other languages, but to think about different people over centuries in different places and different languages, but singing these same words,
Yeah.
thinking through these same thoughts. To me, there's something that's really, really cool, really powerful about sort of just thinking about that continuity of singing words that have been sung for so long by so many other people.
Yeah. It is powerful. And you think about the differences between hymns that last and maybe some songs that we learn. I learned a lot of new songs when I was like in high school and youth group, and a lot of those we still sing today, but there are also some I remember thinking these are going to be great, and for whatever reason just haven't really stood the test of time.
Yeah,
So when you think about songs that stand that test of time and that endure, what are some qualities that come to mind? I mean, we've talked about feeling like the words are melded well with the melody, but are there any other things that you notice or that you've sort of seen about songs that have lasted, or your favorites? What are the qualities
I
you
I,
look for?
I think one of the things that I think having a depth of not just feeling, but um, like scriptural written richness, like theological depth to the words.
Yeah.
I think that um, that means a lot too, and I think that's something that you see in a lot of the older hymns and the best of the newer songs that we sing too. Just that there's. You talked about doing the sermon series on them, and that's something I've done a lot too.
Hmm.
Um, it, that there's so much to talk about. Like when you look through the hymn, it's like, oh, there's, you know, so many different scriptural references going
Right.
on in the words of this hymn that you can draw like, oh, that, that line's a direct reference to this passage of scripture. The verse of Amazing Grace, I once was lost, but now I'm found. The prodigal son was blind, but now I see. John chapter 9 and the healing of the blind man
Yeah.
there. Just in that one verse, there's two specific Bible stories that we're being reminded of as we're
Yeah.
singing through that. And I think that that's a big part of it too. Is just does there some depth to it that you can, something that you can sing a lot that you maybe have sung for a long time and can still come back. It's like, oh, I never really thought about what that meant.
Yeah.
Um, One interesting song that is one I think that we still sing sometimes that maybe we have trouble understanding, that I specifically remember figuring out what it actually meant. Night with ebon pinion, and that
Yes. Yeah.
first line, night with ebon pinion brooded o'er the veil. And I've actually heard people explain that, and their explanation wasn't right.
Right.
I've heard I've heard it explained that ebon pinion is a type of pine tree. But actually, I remember specifically, and it was I talked about singing when family was together. I remember we were talking about it. My grandfather was there, and like I'm gonna go get the dictionary, and like I look it up. It's like, okay, ebon, okay, that's ebony, black, dark. Pinion, it's a wing,
Hmm.
and brooded o'er the veil. It's what a bird or like a mother hen does when she covers her chicks with her wings.
Yeah.
So it's the image of night, like wrapping its
Yeah.
wings on the valley. Yeah, again, that's one of those that I specifically remember. Actually, I had to go look it up, but once I look it up, it's like, oh wow, that's such a beautiful image.
Yes.
So, that can be sometimes the challenge of singing some of those older songs is that it might not be as immediately obvious, but I think sometimes it can be rewarding if you do take a little bit of time to figure out, oh, that's what that means. That's actually really powerful. That's a really beautiful way to say that when you kind of get to
Yeah.
understand what they were getting at.
Oh, yeah. And I think, of course, now songbooks have, and I don't know if Night with Evan Pinion would have one, but a lot of them will have a little asterisk where you could kind of explain, which is helpful
Yeah.
for people. And I wanted to ask a couple of questions, and it may put you on the spot. So I'll answer it first to like give you time to think. But I was curious about songs or lines in songs that stand out and really like strike a chord with you. And then secondly, about the memories that we have often connected to
Mhm.
songs. And is there a song that when we sing, it takes you back to a specific memory? So I'll share mine first. One, I thought of it's been a few weeks ago, and I think it was our invitation song was Rescue the Perishing. And there's one of the verses that says, down in the human heart, crushed by the tempter, feelings lie buried that grace can restore. And it just hit me how beautiful that was, just how poetic that is. And then, wakened by kindness, chords that were broken will vibrate once more. And it was one of those moments, just even during the invitation song, where just kind of the beauty of that language hits you and you think, wow, that's broken chords vibrating again. Like what a beautiful picture of what God can do. And so that's one of those lines that sticks with me. And then I think of any time we sing the song, God is so good, I feel like I'm transported back to the Levy Church of Christ auditorium in North Little Rock, Arkansas. And I remember it was a big deal when we'd learn a new song. I remember, for example, we learned God's Family, it was a big thing. We took our songbooks, and then they handed out God's Family. You could take out the adhesive and put it in the back of the song. Like,
Yeah.
I remember, like, oh man, we're adding a new one. This is a big deal. But God is so good. And it's just a memory of my dad teaching that song, teaching it. There was a time when it was a new song, and it's just, anytime we sing that, I can't remember all the details, but I can picture myself back there in a way that isn't really connected to any other song. For whatever reason, it's that one song. And so I was just curious if either of those had things that come to mind.
I could think of one that is, that's both of those. And like, I always get, even like, as I'm thinking about my answer, I'm getting choked up thinking about it. I taught, one day I was filling in a class in the fellowship hall, and was talking about "O Sacred Head," and like, I couldn't get through it. I kept getting so choked up. Just trying to teach about that song. It was really weird. It had never hit me that hard before. But the line at the end, "Lord, let me never, never outlive my love to thee."
Yeah. That's beautiful.
That's one that, I can't even say it without hardly getting choked up. But I also, like, I remember, I think third grade, that was already one of the songs that I liked a lot. But I remember, like, my mom talking about that line. It's like, what do you get what that means? Which you're a prayer that I will live my whole life, in God's love and returning that love to Him, and just remembering that aspect too. So that's got both of those. Again, I think that's another one that the language, it is hard. At first glance, it uses a lot of words that we don't use every day anymore. But when you actually stop and kind of dig into what those words mean, I think it's really meaningful. And again, I think that's another one where the tune that goes with it too is just, and the harmony, there's a lot of people that went into the making of that tune, because that's another really old one. Actually, the original poem that it's based on goes back about 1,000 years to a Latin poem, and then there was a German hymn that was based on that Latin poem, and the melody, the tune, was written by a person named Hans Leo Hassler, but then Johann Sebastian Bach actually did this a lot, and a lot of the church music that he wrote, he would use hymn tunes that people would know and incorporate them. And like create new harmonizations for them. And so he included that in one of his most famous works, the St. Matthew Passion. It's included like several different places throughout that long work. So again, the harmony for that is just beautiful. It's again, I think it really fits the depth and meaning of the words as well. So a lot of great things that are beautiful about that hymn.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's amazing to think about. As you were mentioning that, here's a poem written in one language, and then you've got a tune over here, and it may be the case, I guess, maybe likely the case, that this isn't the first tune it's ever been paired with, but somehow you get this together, and this is endured for us, and it can be so moving, and it's just amazing to think about the transformation through time, about how that got to us. And how moving it is. And this has been really enjoyable for me, just kind of digging into these. Are there any other, I just want to give you a chance. Are there things I haven't brought up, or things you think of where you're like, oh, I wish more people knew about this story, or, I wish people thought about this when we sing. I know you lead singing. And so you have the perspective of watching us all as we're singing, Are there things you would want to tell, a message you'd want to encourage Christians with when it comes to these hymns?
Well, I'll tell you, I know that I do, being a music person, one thing that I really have to watch in myself is that it's really easy for me to sing songs and not be really thinking about the words, but either thinking about the tune or the part that I'm trying to sing, or even just I know it so well that I don't have to necessarily think about it. That is something that I know for myself that I have to really make myself stop and think about what it is that I'm singing, about the words, and put the focus there, and not worry so much about the musical aspects of it, even though they can complement each other so well. So I think that is a good thing for us all, to kind of be reminded
Yeah.
of. But yeah, I mean, we've talked about a lot of my favorite hymn writers and hymns. That I think the only person that's one of my favorites that we haven't talked about, but that maybe we could just throw out there somebody else for people to check out. Charles Wesley is another one of my favorites. Another a British hymn writer, and like wrote 6,000 some odd hymns. Fanny Crosby's another good one for people to be aware of. That she was blind for pretty much her entire life. She wrote 8 or 9,000 hymns. She's one especially that, like, if you, I like hymn books that have in the back have an index where you can see composers and authors.
Yes.
And pretty much, I imagine this is probably still true. Pretty much any American hymn book that you open up, if you were to look in that back in that index, there's going to be more hymns in there by Fanny Crosby than by anybody else. Blessed Assurance is a great one of hers. Rescue the Perishing that you mentioned, I'm pretty sure that's one of hers. So yeah, those are a couple others that to encourage people to check out that are that wrote some great hymns that. Again, we're just the amount of hymns that they wrote is pretty amazing.
Yeah, those are crazy numbers. How many hymns they would have written, and to think about how many they wrote that we don't really know, or like don't know what tunes were connected with them, maybe. But for all those that endure, there are still others. You know, I mentioned earlier some of the newer songs. There are going to be some that stick with us and some that don't, and you know, it might be tempting for people to say, well, that's these new songs, they don't last. Well, as far as I understand it, it's always been that way.
Yeah.
You know, hymn writers wrote a lot of different songs, and then certain ones just seem to have that lasting power and staying power.
Yeah. And, you know, sometimes too, it's interesting. There's a newer song that's not really new. That's one that I really like, Before the Throne of God Above, that actually those words go back 100, 150 years.
Yeah.
But somebody recently wrote a tune to go with it in the last 30 years or so that kind of brought it back into attention. It's a hymn that probably was not well known. But so sometimes that can happen. Like, you can kind of rediscover some of those older songs if a new tune gets put with them and they get kind of put back out there.
Yeah. And I didn't realize that Before the Throne was one of those. One I have noticed, just because I've tried to look it up to lead it, and I've noticed this, but there's a version we sing of And Can It Be that's very different than if you flip open the songbook to And Can It Be. And so that's a neat way that the tunes change, but kind of that core message, even if the language is a little different in the older version, it's the same essential message that goes through. So it's kind of fascinating to see that.
Yeah, that is another good example of that. That's the same kind of thing where it's a newer tune that got put with that, and that's a Charles Wesley one.
Well, I didn't realize, didn't make the Charles Wesley connection. I also know, and I don't know if you've been in a situation like this before, but I've been in a situation where I've been leading from a book, and sometimes in different editions of the songbook, they'll make changes to certain lines. And so if someone's saying, hey, we need more songbooks, and you go get, here's the 9th edition, and we all have third editions, you'll get to a song, and then all of a sudden half the people are singing one thing and half the people, and you know, and I've had that happen a couple of times, and it is really confusing for everybody until you figure out, okay, so even in, and this would be, I guess, for more modern tunes, but even as they do new editions for various reasons, they might update this line or change this line. So just kind of fascinating to trace that throughout history. And it's a good reminder that you need to know what, if you're going to use a songbook, know which edition everybody has. But
the "O Thou Fount of Every Blessing" is probably one of the biggest ones that that depending on which hymn book you look at, that somewhere along the way the first verse got adapted a lot, and so it can be very different.
That is the one I was singing. I think I got to teach me ever to adore thee, and then was teach me some melodious sonnet or something, you know, and we're kind of looking around and wait, because because your first instinct is, I must be singing the wrong verse. You're like,
Mhm.
no, this is the right. So, yeah, those are interesting things to walk into. So that's just a general song leading tip. If you're leading that song, make sure you've got the same words for that.
On that note, another good song leading tip is not every hymn works to only sing the first verse. I remember one time I did "A Mighty Fortress Is Our God," and I didn't look at the closely, and just it was going to be the closing song, and like, well, we'll just do the first verse of it, and then it ends up with a verse talking about that Satan is out there and is cruel, and that's how the first verse ends.
Right.
If you just stop there, you don't go on to God has won the victory.
Yeah,
Sometimes sometimes it doesn't work. So it's always good to kind of look closely at the verses. But if you're going to decide which verse to leave out,
that is these are good rules. These are good things to remember. And we may have to go over maybe more of those. That may be a good podcast idea to share some of those things. But appreciate so much, Mark Aaron, joining us. Thank you for making time for this. And Connections, I hope this is a conversation that's been encouraging to you. If you are in the Murray County area and don't have a church home, we'd love for you to worship with us. And we hope that this has been a blessing to everybody who's listening to it. You'll always receive a warm welcome from the Graymere Church family, and we appreciate you spending time with us in Connections. Thank you for being part of Connections. We hope it was an encouragement to you. If you live in the Columbia area and don't have a church home, we would love for you to worship with us. You can find out information about meeting times, classes, and what to expect at graymere.com. You will always receive a warm welcome from the Graymere Church of Christ.